Okay, so as we continue on to this exploration here, representation, I guess I should preface this by asking the question, right? Does representation matter? And in this case, it has to do quite directly with our representatives in Congress or the Senate, right? Like, does it matter, right, the gender makeup of representatives or the work, the jobs that they come from, or the education level that they have, or right? And I mean, these are the questions we have to ask. But first, we have to get a sense of what it looks like in Congress. So we might consider representation of men and women in the House of Representatives versus the Senate. Right? We're seeing way more representation of men than women by times over. I've got a video link here, and I'll put that in the video information. All right, this is a graph highlighting the share of women in the United States Congress from 1971 to 2021. And wow, just looking at this, it looks quite steep, right? It's like, wow, look at the inroads. Though if we look a little bit closer, we're seeing that it starts at 3% here in 1971. And this high point on this scale is topped out at 26.5% here. Right, so we are certainly seeing growth, and it looks meaningful. It looks, wow, you can see it happening, right? And we just have to be aware that we're talking about 25% of, right, it's topped out at a high of, 26.5% of 435 members. All right, I've got another video clip for you here, which I will also post below. Okay, so representation in terms of race here at House of Representatives and in the Senate, right? So broken down by race, we see that there are a lot more white members of the House of Representatives and Senate than of other racial or ethnic groups here. Okay, let's see here. We are seeing this measure of the different Congress classes, starting from the 112th Congress to the 115th. We see on the left-hand side more minorities head to Congress. It's split up by the House, which is a darker burgundy on the top and a tan color on the bottom. We see kind of a growth over that period of Congress, Congress classes. So from 19% minorities in the House of Representatives, we see in the 112th class, we see that go up to these 21% in the 115th class. Where in the, in the Senate, it's 4% in the 112th class, and it goes up to 9%, right? So something. Is it a lot? No, that's clearly not a lot. Now we can look to women's gains in the Senate here. Split by the Senate and the House. Same with the colors here. We see a growth in the House from 17% to 19%, and in the Senate from 17% to 21% over that period of time. So we're seeing some movement, not radical movement, but some movement when it comes to more women and more minorities or minority women in these positions here as well. All right, so why don't we consider people's work here? Okay, we can consider their occupation, their level of education, their religion. This ends up being a conversation often, what someone's religion is. Okay, it looks here, top occupation is public office, right? So it sounds like when it's measured here, if someone's previous position is already serving in public office, that would be their how they would be counted here. And so we've got a lot of representatives counted there, followed by business, followed by law, followed by education and real estate, and then a bunch of other options here. So you can see moving down the row here, right? We see moving down this way. And then we're also seeing, even just check out the law here, right? Law is more than business here, where it's got 50 members who are in law and 156 in the House of Representatives, which is interesting, right? It seems like that would be almost is not the right word, but an overrepresentation of lawyers, right? Or I suppose maybe you have to ask yourself, right, if within this space X amount of folks are in the legal field, how might this affect how people see the world? That would be one question. All right, let's look to education here. Advanced degrees, you see on the left-hand side, advanced degrees, right, 234 to 57 in the Senate. Bachelor's or associate's degree, 184 to 22 here, and then no degree at 13 in the House. Okay, so that's interesting. We might consider whether or not the number of people who got advanced degrees, if that's an oversampling, the overrepresentation of folks with higher degrees in these positions of government. We might ask other questions when it comes to considering folks' religion and representation, right? Some of these other questions are like, does it matter to have representation? Or what does it do to have representation of what? Of more groups, or people in other professions, or people of other faiths, or people who have different levels of education, and so on and so forth. These are the questions I think that should be jarred by seeing this, or these examples. Wealth in Congress, so we might look at the 20 wealthiest senators and representatives, right? And we're seeing, wow, so it's at 283 million here at the top, Darrell Issa, followed by 136 million, and all the way down to, let's see here, Susan Delben, right, at 28 million, right? So considering the wealth in Congress, right, questions you might ask, right, is there a higher representation of wealthy people in Congress than in the general public, right? Is there something to be said about this, right? Or is there something to be said about folks who having people in Congress who are not millionaires, for example? Okay, so here are some additional things to highlight in the same vein here. So millionaires in Congress, 51%, millionaires in America, 5%, right? So over half of our representatives in Congress are millionaires, but that's a much smaller percent of the country as a whole. White men in Congress, 77%, white men in America, 31%, right? So that overrepresentation. Women in Congress, 20%, women in America, 51%. So it's an underrepresentation, right, of women. Over 55 in Congress, 62%, and over 55 in America, 28%. So we have an overrepresentation in Congress of people over 55, right? So hopefully this is getting us to, right, be thinking about this. Well, does it matter? And if it does matter, why does it matter? Okay. So Congress does not represent the public demographically. When we think about demographics, or what a country looks like, for example, the number of men, the number of women, gender, race, ethnicity, sexuality, sexual orientation. Those are demographics, right? So Congress does not represent the public demographically. There's many more white males over the age of 40 in Congress than in the U.S. population, right? Highlighted. So some of the questions we're thinking about with this, then, is a question around descriptive representation. And that's the idea that an elected body should mirror demographically the population that it represents. Obviously, that's a theory. It's not a reality in the United States. And how do we know that? Well, we know that from the slides we've just looked at, right? We know that from the last slide we just saw, highlighting the number of women in the U.S. as 51% of the country, right? But in terms of representation, we're only seeing 20% of women, of members of Congress are women, right? So we consider those questions, right? And then we ask questions as well, like, should Congress be more descriptively representative? Would it threaten democracy if representatives of particular demographic groups were favored in elections in order to bring about a more descriptive representation? Right. So many questions to consider when we think about what it means to have a multiracial and multi-ethnic democracy in the United States, and how that representation looks, and what we think about it, right? Should it be a more diverse representation? Are things fine as they are? And leave the space for us to have these conversations for sure.